Across the animal kingdom, and indeed all walks of life, there exists a trend towards a 1-to-1 sex ratio, 50% males and 50% females. But why? In order to truly maximize reproductive efficiency, it would make sense to have a preponderance of females. Males have higher reproductive efficiency. One male can mate with many females and produce many batches of offspring, whereas one female can only produce one batch of offspring. In 1930, Ronald Fisher, a pioneer of evolutionary biology, postulated why sex ratios might tend toward equal distribution of the sexes. Fisher's predictions were based on parental investment. If the costs of raising male offspring are equal to the costs of raising female offspring, then the sex ratio should be equal. If, however, one sex is more costly to produce than the other, then the less costly sex should become more common, because the parents producing that sex will have an advantage. In 1967, evolutionary biologist William Hamilton explained Fisher's ideas further, assuming the costs of producing each sex are equal. Imagine a population in which one sex predominates over the other, say females. Since there are plenty of females, this guy will have a pretty good chance of mating. He's a hot commodity. If he does, his parents will have more grandchildren than parents of most females, and their male-producing genes will spread, bringing the sex ratio closer to 1-to-1. The Fisherian ratio holds true for a multitude of species, including humans. However, there are many instances in which Fisher's 1-to-1 ratio doesn't hold. Ratio bias can exist in two different forms. First exists on the individual level, in which a pair of parents may produce more males than females, or more females than males. The second exists on the population level. On this larger scale, the occurrence of one sex is more common than the other in the population overall. Perhaps the most obvious explanation for this uneven distribution of the sexes is that there is some kind of outside force acting on the sex ratio. Indeed, there are a number of external factors that can affect the balance of sexes within a population. There are 3 age levels upon which these factors can act: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Sex ratio is measured at conception to form a zygote. Occurrences during meiosis, as well as chemicals or hormones, can affect this ratio. Secondary sex ratio begins to be measured at birth. One common example is sex determination by temperature in turtles and many other reptiles. If the eggs are kept too hot or too cold, the entire brood may become one sex. Tertiary sex ratio is measured at adulthood, when an animal reaches sexual maturity. This ratio, of course, is affected by infant mortality, predation, and other pressures of selection. These all seem potentially detrimental. But here's where it gets tricky. Many animals, from insects to birds and mammals, can purposefully skew the ratio of males to females that they produce. Though they may not consciously decide to have fewer or more of the same sex, their bodies do the work for them. For example, a classic study on red deer, a polygynous mammal, showed that higher-ranking females gave birth to healthier offspring. Healthier offspring grew up to be healthier adults. This advantage was particularly beneficial for sons, who need the added strength to win a harem. A 1973 paper by Robert Trivers and Dan Willard noted that for most creatures, when conditions are good, males have a higher reproductive capacity than females. When conditions are bad, however, females out-reproduce males. Males often face more competition for mates, and in sexually dimorphic species especially, can be more susceptible to food shortages than females of the same species. Their model predicted that when conditions are good, mothers will produce more sons. When conditions are bad, they'll produce more daughters, thereby maximizing their reproductive success. Naturally, in organisms where females have more to gain from being larger, the opposite is true, as in parasitic wasps. In some animals, social structure plays a role in the determination of sex ratios. For animals that practice philopatry and remain at home to help with future offspring, it's advantageous for their parents to create more of the same helper sex. In fact, the amount of adjustment affected on the sex ratio has been correlated with the benefit the helpers provide. For some animals, like birds, females will adjust the sex ratio of their broods according to how attractive they deem their mate. More attractive fathers will end up having more sons. More attractive sons who will be more successful at spreading their genes. Perhaps the most in-depth and surprising research on this amazing ability of an organism to adjust its offspring's sex ratio according to environmental factors has been done on the hymenopterans, ants, bees, and wasps. Female wasps can adjust the sex ratio of their progeny according to the size of the host on which they lay. Bill Hamilton developed the theory of local mate competition. Local mate competition occurs when females lay eggs on small, isolated patches, and their offspring must mate with one another. In this situation, brothers must compete with brothers to find mates. When this occurs, the population tends toward a female-biased sex ratio. More daughters means more mates for the sons and less inbreeding. In these types of insects, will usually adjust their sex ratio if another female is already present. One of the problems with Fisher's principle is that it assumes a starting condition of two sexes. Many plants are hermaphroditic, having both male and female sex organs. Interestingly, most do adhere to Fisher's principle. They usually produce more flowers than fruits, because fruits are more energetically expensive to produce. Many animals are hermaphrodites as well. In these instances, as in hermaphroditic plants, it's necessary to look at the allocation of resources between the sexual parts. The study of sex ratios is an important part of biology. In biological studies, the health of a population can be assessed by looking at the sex ratio in comparison to its expected value. From a genetics standpoint, it's interesting to note that chromosomal sex determination isn't everything. Further understanding of sex ratio theories will help us to elucidate how sex evolved in the first place. Thanks for listening. College, 2012.